going on this thing, John, if that's all the same to you, because we have got 64 people here, a little bit of a housekeeping as we get going. We'll see some more people join in as we go. Thank you for being here. First of all, my name is Bill Seitzler. I work for a company called Smith Geiger. I think you might know that. Our first time for helping us do the webinar is John Culleton. You see his handsome picture there on the right of the screen. You hopefully see his now bearded face coming in hot and heavy from Minneapolis. John, say hello to the group.
Hey everybody. I got to know a lot of the Raycom folks, but I have not talked to the Gray folks yet, the original Gray folks. So nice to talk to all of you as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're talking storytelling today, guys, and it's a packed session. The hope is to go about 45 to 50 minutes with a lot of good examples, and John and I will go back and forth talking about storytelling versus reporting and a lot of other things that you can then have other conversations with your team on as well. Obviously, we're the only ones that can be quote-unquote heard at this moment in time, but if you have a question, please ask your question using the chat function anytime during the presentation, okay? You are going to get a link, an email to view this presentation back on YouTube. So for anybody that doesn't get a chance to see it as we're doing it live, please know that they'll be able to see that as well. And we'll definitely save some time at the very end for questions. So if you want to wait and hold your questions at the end, that'll be cool. I also have a 3-question poll that I'm going to have come your way in a couple of minutes as well, which hopefully we'll be able to see some results of that at the very end as well. But let's get going. It's 12:03 and we'll jump into this thing. Let's start with some questions, right? Question number 1, what does the audience want? And by that we mean today's audience want from our stories. Do they expect the same kind of storytelling that potentially they got 5 and 6 years ago, or even 10 or 12 years ago before they were relying on this device a whole lot? Or do they want something more? What do we mean by the word storytelling, right? Is that the same as reporting? We'll talk about that and what all that entails. And then is storytelling different than it used to be? John, these are 4 questions that you ask a lot with the stations that you get by to and in bigger rooms with reporters involved. And by the way, thank you reporters that have showed up to this in addition to all the news managers.
I think the reporters and photographers, we've been doing a lot with photojournalists too. Sometimes we're the last to hear about these things. I think their knowledge of the audience becomes critical. Sometimes it's only the management that knows.
Yeah.
I think this discussion too, Bill, of the storytelling versus really reporting, there are times when it's hard to tell a story versus just disseminating information. Is storytelling different than it used to be? I'll show some stuff today that is truly different, I think, than what we've seen. But a lot of times, next-gen storytelling is about kind of shining up our best practices.
Right, right. I think there are inherently some things that I started working in the business in 1986 in Lubbock, Texas. And John, you started, I don't know when, but I think it was in Toledo, Ohio. And some of those axioms of what made for good storytelling still exist today, but they've taken a little bit of a twist, obviously, with social and digital as well. But some of those best practices still exist today, and we'll hopefully answer all 4 of these questions as we go throughout this thing, right? So the biggest themes, some of these have not changed, right? Accuracy. We see these in research a lot. We always have, but accuracy's become even more important from a research standpoint, primarily because of the fact that there are so many people telling stories that weren't telling stories before in the social space and the digital space. And yes, there's that thing that some would refer to as fake news, that where they don't necessarily trust the sources that they're getting it from. So, you know, these things, if we don't,
we'll get into, Bill, into process storytelling. Process storytelling, you know, really is not only a good way to tell a story, but it also, the audience looks at process storytelling as legitimizing our work often.
Absolutely.
In this world of not trusting the media, sometimes when they understand how the story was made, they put more faith in it.
Yeah, I think process has always been important, but you're 100% right. It gets to the accuracy, it gets to the fairness in balancing out not just 2 sides of the story, but multiple sides in many cases. And it really also helps with clarity. If we don't have clarity, our audience is going to use that remote control, guys. They are going to use their phone to go somewhere else. They're not going to hang around and wait for us to make it all clear for them at some point. So there's that balance and great storytelling of making it really interesting, potentially losing a little bit of clarity for a half a moment or 2, but we've got to be able to be creative and clear at the same time. John, I'll let you pick up on these next two: urgency, brevity, and tone.
Well, I mean, the brevity stands for itself. I mean, people say, how long should a story be? And I say, as long as it needs to be, I think is the best theme. We're not cookie cutter. Everything's a minute 10, but don't accidentally go a minute 50 when you meant to go a minute 10. The appropriate emotions, I think, are really key, particularly for reporters as they mature, reporters and anchors as they mature. The audience expects us to have a tonality that fits the story. And that can be subjective, but a monotone delivery that carries, every story the same way is not purposeful anymore. The impact piece is really what we want to get to here. A lot of the stations I've worked with for years know we pound on this subject, because if you can go to the next slide, what's happened is you have a generation of news consumers who get news where they want it, and they cherry pick, and yet we give them linear newscasts. And in those linear newscasts, the question is, can we find the impact early in a story? And this is where they hit the eject button when they don't hear that early. I know we're talking about storytelling, but storytelling really does begin with those words that come out of the anchor's mouth that set up the reporter. What is impact? Well, you can see the chart on the left that when we made it a few years ago, we didn't realize how long we'd be using it, but it really is how the news affects you in those many dimensions. Our point has been that urgency alone really won't satisfy this next generation of news consumers. Now, we were all taught, we've tried to teach urgency, urgency, urgency. And of course, we want that in all of our copy points. But we're listening much more for getting the impact up near the top. I selected an example this summer from WBTV in Charlotte, where it's a story not unlike many of you would cover. But if you listen closely, the impact and the urgency meld themselves early in the story. We don't wait for the impact just to add the urgency to the top of it. So listen in here.
Now to this little boy in the Oshkosh shirt. He's fighting for his life tonight. He's one of 6 siblings in a Charlotte crash on Monday with their mom, and police charged the woman who hit them with DWI. Their family spoke with Alex Giles at the hospital tonight, and Alex just got these pictures from them to put faces with the tough headline. It's a story you're only going to see here on WBTV. Alex is live right now. Any update, Alex, first and foremost, on the condition of that little boy?
Now, Molly and Isaiah Beckman underwent surgery this evening. It's his 4th surgery since the accident happened Monday night on Tyvola Center Drive. Naz and one of his sisters, Taya, are badly hurt. So is their mother. But all 6 kids were in the car with her when police say a woman who was driving under the influence hit them. It has been a routine for Davia Bridge.
So we cut this off, but I think we know how that can be written just for urgency, just for the latest on the conditions, etc. But from the get-go, we're humanizing the story and also covering the right amount of ground in terms of what's new with the story. So a lot of our writing efforts with reporters and producers has been to try to push the idea of getting to both at the same time.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. One of the things I should have said off the top, I had in my notes here, but I forgot to mention is this entire webinar is, yes, for reporters, but it's also for anchors, because if the anchors don't, as John talked about going in, if they don't understand what the urgency and the impact is and what their emotional connectivity and all the things that lead us into that proper storytelling is, we may not get there. They may click off. So I think that's a really good point. I'm glad that we opened this up to as many different folks as possible to be able to understand and know what that is. And I think this was a great example of it. Let me forward this up a little bit. So, that talent, enthusiasm about content we're seeing really does make or break us, kind of right off the top. Interested in is interesting, right? We just know that. You're going to see a clip in a couple of seconds that really identifies that from a research standpoint.
I think that to that first point, Bill, I think that think of a viewer's experience in a linear newscast, and they don't know what the lineup looks like. They don't know what the news of the day might even be. And they're just going to ride the wave based on how we position ourselves as being journalists and people who care about our stories. Now, the other piece of this, and this is a thread throughout, is meeting people in stories. That might sound simplistic, and we were pulling you guys on it today, but I feel like we sometimes, in the speed of what we're trying to do, we're missing getting the real people into stories.
Yeah, that's true, right? John, a lot of times in some of your sessions that I've heard you do, you do a great job of talking about using accessible words which means don't, conversational writing, words that I hear all day long, I can access those words. Same thing for people, right? It's the same thing. It's like people they identify with and maybe can understand the story through, not necessarily officials or those types of folks. And then the focused storytelling, not overwhelming. I'll let you pick it up from there, because that's a really big.
Well, look, at every level, and some of us have tons of experience, some of you on there don't have a lot. The trick is, the whole play is how much to include in a story, right? I see stories all the time where it's just like we backed up the dump truck and the factual dump truck and poured it on viewers. And so this Al Tompkins, I selected his quote, which is select, do not compress. Because sometimes what we end up doing is saying, well, we got to shovel everything in there.
Right.
And in the meantime, we really made no impact really with the story at all.
And what will the takeaways be, guys? I mean, think about your work overall, right? You want your work to mean something, and for them to take away things that will hopefully change what they do or what somebody else is doing. If you've put so much in there that they don't know what to take away from it, in a way, your work kind of gets wasted a little bit because of that very point.
So we have a couple of examples that speak
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
This is from a dial test in Houston, and I've shown it around, so pardon me for repeating it for some of you, but a lot of you haven't seen it. And this was an exercise to test live shots. And there's about 50 people in a row, maybe more. And you can see on the left, their dials they can go up or down. They start at 50. Now, if they ever get to 90, it's like a tornado on the ground, but 80, close to 80 is really strong. This is a live shot where admittedly the reporter doesn't have a lot of material, but watch where the audience goes as this live shot progresses.
We begin with the man shot by the woman he allegedly tried to rob.
It happened at a Northeast County gas station that's where Eyewitness News reporter Tracy Clemens joins us live. Tracy?
Yeah, Eric, that woman was in her car right behind me here at Pump 3 at this Exxon station when the suspect opened her door and demanded her purse at knife point. Now, instead of handing over the purse, she actually pulled out her gun. Now, this happened just before 6 o'clock this evening at the Exxon right here at the corner of FM 2100 and Saddle Creek Farms Drive in Crosby. The Harris County Sheriff's Office says after the woman shot the man in the shoulder, he took off running down FM 2100 where he collapsed, and that's where deputies found him right there. He was life-flighted to Memorial Hermann Hospital with that gunshot wound. People here at the gas station have been talking about this all evening, and they say that he just messed with the wrong person.
Crosby, maybe in Houston that'll work, not in Crosby. Over here, Crosby holds their own. Over here, you shoot first and then ask questions later. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a little scary because this is a good area, like a good neighborhood. So to hear that, it's actually really scary because I always come to this gas station. So.
Now, the woman had a concealed carry permit for that gun, so at this point, she doesn't face any charges. The suspect, on the other hand, well, he, along with being in the hospital tonight, also is charged with aggravated robbery. Reporting live in Crosby, Tracy Clemens, 13 Eyewitness News.
All right.
Now, we all know what a really nicely put together package looks like, and those are gems, right? This wasn't that. They were late. We didn't even have the traditional video of police in there talking to the clerks. And we actually thought this wouldn't do well. We thought the camera was kind of too shaky. But among the 10 live shots we tested, this tested the best by far. And the audience told us really later that Tracy really carried the day here, that it was just his passion for letting us know what happened there that made them invest in a story that some of them didn't even care about.
Yeah, I love it when the dials surprise us, and sometimes they surprise us and you don't see them go up, you see them go down. But to get an 80 on something, for those of you that don't do a lot of dials, 70 is a good score. You go over 70, that's a good score. 60 is kind of acceptable. Obviously, if they go down, more people go down to go up. But this is like rock star kind of stuff for what? A live shot where they was, like John's point was, they quickly put it together. The thing I liked the most here, John, was the way he told the story.
Right.
It was a story. There was a narrative, right? And B, he didn't just give me facts and information and fact. And B, he seemed like if I'd have rolled up to that gas station and this just happens to be telling that one story to me, he would have probably told it in much the same way.
Yeah, very natural story. Look, I mean, people question, they say, do active live shots matter? Yeah, sometimes they do. I mean, you don't, in front of a courthouse with a late verdict, an active live shot would look bizarre. But when we got it, when it's the
Yeah.
best way to tell the story, boy, audiences really do pay attention.
Yeah.
Jumping over to the people with whom we identify in a story, this is a very simple story from Philadelphia. It's not one that's going to knock your socks off. But I think what you'll see as you watch it is what the alternative storytelling would have been had they not found a person to identify with. It's a community camera program to try to help create safety in neighborhoods. It's driven, as you'll see eventually, by a politician. But instead of going down that road of where the politician wanted us to go, the reporter took his own run at this.
But it has a succinct purpose to make a Philadelphia neighborhood safer and more stable. Live in Nicetown is Action News reporter Bob Brooks. Bob, lots of new cameras are coming to that part of town.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry guys, I messed it up.
Yeah, Jim, you said it. Really, the goal of this program is to do this, install a lot of those security cameras again all over the 8th District. Now, the good news about this, it will be free for residents to have their cameras installed into their house. And we spoke with some residents who think this is a very, very good idea. Cooking great meals, holding a sauté pan. In the words of Paprika's head chef, Will Hunter, what he doesn't do, demolition work. But nonetheless, that's a sledgehammer he was holding and showing us today. You see, Paprika's located in Nicetown, was broken into about 3 months ago. The suspect used the sledgehammer and left it there.
The guy here, he put a sheet here, knocked it in so it didn't make no noise. When I came in that morning, after it was gone.
Hunter runs the restaurant with his sister-in-law, Jamila Abdullah. They don't want to move. Well, today, 8th District Councilwoman Cindy Bass unveiled her plan to help convince them to stay and make the 8th District safer and cleaner. It's called the Community Leadership Caucus Camera Program. The goal, surveillance cameras across the 8th District.
So it was a news conference that all of a sudden became a memorable story. And I like to show it because people often have in storytelling sessions say, you know, we don't have any time in the field, and that's true. And I said, well, do you have time to get the one person that might matter to the audience? And in this case, they shot this fast, and yet, what do you remember about the story? The guy holding the sledgehammer. What is that story without that guy with the sledgehammer?
And the live shot was well done too, in that, you know, we're able to quickly go to the scene, see what the cameras are, and that sort of stuff. And to your point, not only did he find the real person, but we asked him to kind of reenact or at least show us where. And that's something, guys, that you really should get yourself. I get it. It's hard enough to get an interview. But think, to John's point, if we'd have got the real person, but all he's doing is backing his burgers and not taking us to showing us a sledgehammer and where he went in the door, that's not going to be nearly as memorable either, right?
And then the other example we'll get to here now is the idea of, do we really want to take a story and do a lot about a little, meaning add a lot of focus to it, or do we want to do a little about a lot and have a bunch of elements that have less impact? Now, obviously, when you're covering big stories, sometimes you've got to do a little about a lot. It's a big breaker. We're trying to get all the big elements in. You'll see a network reporter do that with a hurricane story or things like that. But when we have the time to create a focus in a story, it could be far more impactful. It might mean some of the elements make it into the anchor lead in or the anchor tag. But we've got an example of a story I want to show you that's more a lot about a little. And this is from Boyd Huppert in Minneapolis at CARE. This is not one of his award winners. And that's why I picked this as more of an everyday thing. I pulled this, they show this at the Pointer. It's a day when some unemployment statistics came out a couple years ago. And we know what those stories look like. And instead of doing all the university professor and yada yada stats, he found a location, a central location, and created characters around the narrative of people who are having to change jobs because of the unemployment situation.
Today's our first day open for business.
You could see the new business in Brooklyn Center as a hamburger joint.
Hi, how you doing?
Or you could picture the nation's economy in a box.
You turn the burgers with cheese, please.
That's Wendy Reno, who just opened the place with her husband.
My background is in engineering. I'm actually a civil engineer by trade.
2 years ago, they were home builders.
We need a small fry as well.
Just with the decline in individuals wanting to purchase homes, even being able to finance homes,
it drastically reduced our business.
Yeah, 2 boxes. William Best is running the fryer. He was an area manager at Walgreens. And your strips are done. 2 strips are done. Till his layoff after 28 years. No, I've never been in food before. It's different, but I won't complain. I like it. Large banana, small strawberry. Chris Evans worked in IT.
This is actually about probably half of what I was making doing technical support for Apple. And, but you know, if it pays the rent, that's all that matters, right? All right, it's going to be $481.
In 3 weeks' time, we received over 300 applications.
My background is actually in culinary arts.
Let's fry up. Thank you. Ray So was an executive sous chef.
Ticket number 4.
At some fancy restaurant.
Got a double champ, large fry. I think right now with quick serve, it's actually gone up just because people are looking for a meal that's, $2, $3, $4.
$8.35 out of 20.
Florida-based Checkers has opened 30 new stores this year, while high-end restaurants and hundreds of Starbucks have been closing. Did we mention what used to be in this space?
This used to be actually a Starbucks. It closed down probably about a year ago. I guess if they went to across the street, there's cheaper coffee at the Super America.
You can't do that until the chicken strips are ready yet. All of the workers we met.
And what size combo would you like on that?
Helpful, determined, and happy to be employed.
2 kids meal strips.
Yet none of them were they expected to be.
All right, Freddie, you're up, man.
You could go to the U to study the economy, or you could stop for a burger and listen. Boyd Hupert, Carol 11 News, Brooklyn Center.
Pretty nice effort, right? It's just all the humanity that goes into the challenges of keeping your career alive, versus trying to interview a million people about the subject. It was all right there. I just think.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great example. What we don't see here, guys, is the context of what the anchors were saying ahead of it, which obviously would be very helpful in clearing out a lot of the quote unquote details of what the urgency was, why he's doing the story today. But to John's point, this is so much more memorable in terms of, okay, that's cool. I like all those facts you're telling me, anchors, but what does it really mean to me and my neighbor? What it means is you got a Checkers full of people over there that used to do other jobs that maybe quote unquote paid more or that they set out to do. And here's where they are now. And it's a great example of how we take everyday bigger picture issues and then turn it into better storytelling.
We can keep rolling here.
Yeah.
The question of storytelling is kind of interesting because you guys have your own list, right? The word gets tossed around ever since we've all been in the business and we're in school for it and different things. I mean, what really is storytelling? Beginning, middle, and end gets tossed out. Illuminating people caught in difficult or great moments, clear explanation of what's at stake. We could whiteboard this thing all day. Would love to hear from you guys. But kind of in this rally I've had from a lot of clients to do more storytelling, I kind of went back into stuff that we all would have done in literature class and what was really the classic definition. And it does fit some of the stories we have, this idea of getting people into the opening, creating conflict, and then letting the story rise to a key point, climax, a pinnacle moment in the story, and then letting the story drift back down. The point in this discussion is not every story can be told this way, but when we have the potential to do it, do we actually do it?
Yeah.
I've got some copy thing here, if you can see it on the next page, Bill, that would show that these are, first two are live shot lead-ins. And I would argue on the first two on the left that the last line, and they didn't care who was around. And on the other one, if you're not alone, if you can't tell the difference, that there's a tension to that is absent in the third area, where the last sentences, we spoke to some experts today about what that means and who needs to be especially careful. In the box below it, I suggested, what about we spoke to experts and what you're about to hear is critical to breathing safely for you or someone you care about. That's conflict, that's tension to kickstart a story. And if you're copy reading or you're writing a story and you're looking at that anchor lead in and then subsequently maybe a live reporter lead in, where is the conflict that creates the point where the story can move forward? And when it's absent, I think a story can fall flat. Skip that, Bill, if you would.
Oh, so sorry. Yeah.
That was the one. Yeah. So I'm going to just be tedious just for a second and show you what I mean about coming to the pinnacle, the climax of a story. This is a narrative about someone saving, a sister saving her brother from a pool. And what you'll notice is there's the parents on the top. They keep their eye on them. The mom's talking, right? That's her soundbite. And then the kids are screaming for help. But in blue, but by the time they had escaped the most extreme danger, but by that time they had escaped the most extreme danger. Thankfully, Savannah was watching Josh from her swing when he fell trying to fill up his squirt gun. So the point being here is it resolves itself so quickly that it loses the storytelling narrative. And I see so many scripts where we actually have a real story to tell that I don't think we drag the viewer along as long as we possibly could. Now, what you're thinking is, well, the viewer already knows to the end of the story. Well, I know the ends of movies that I watched for the third time because the narrative to get me there. If you go to the next page, what I suggested here is that they stayed in a chronological fashion for this particular story and try to replace that other sentence with, that was the kid screaming for help. Josh fell in trying to fill up his squirt gun. His sister Savannah was watching from her swing. Then she ran to the pool. So again, we're still hooked on how is this thing going to end? And I think when we, again, our argument would be you don't have this in every story, but when you do, let's go ahead and take it to the climactic moment.
Hey, John, I have a quick question for you on this. So I certainly agree with all of that and looking for the climax or reveals or things that will lend to better storytelling and not just giving it away up front. There are stories, right, where if we're telling it chronologically, it is a little boring until we get there. So I think you gotta juxtapose those. Juxtapose? I don't think that's a word. You have to take a look at what you're dealing with, and I think that's your point. That you're saying not every story will work, but when you do, why would you overlook the obvious way of getting them to the finish line? I think that's.
Well, you might need to use a video off the top of the package that actually is farther ahead in time.
Yeah.
Just because it's the best video we have, and then back up and go chronologically again. There's a lot of ways to tell it, but I think I'll skip the next example on this just because it'll get too tedious. The other piece of this in storytelling that is worth a lot of discussion at your stations is there anything left toward the end of a story, right? Because a lot of times the story just runs out of gas. The viewers know that. The viewers and dials oftentimes, once that package ends and we come back live to the reporter, they're like, I'm done. So it was interesting. I have two examples of leaving something for the end. This on the left is copy from a live tag on a story about a guy who helped another guy find his wedding ring he had lost at the beach on vacation. It was a nice little story. It wasn't the biggest deal in the world. But the reporter comes back on the live tag and says, believe it or not, this is not the first time Tim lost this wedding ring. He says he lost his first on his honeymoon night. He promises his wife there will not be a third time. So our tendency, right, might be to have used this earlier in the story, but magically saving it to the end makes it kind of a more rounded story where we really have some sort of wonderful resolve.
And it may be the most memorable part of the whole story for a guy like me, who's petrified of losing his wedding ring.
Well, I've done it. It's a dangerous thing. You can't buy another one fast enough. The other one is this live tag out of a story. This is an anchor tag in Dallas. So there was some kids lost because the grandpa took them from Dallas to Green Bay, and he had some dementia. It all ended well, but they came back out on the set after the package ran, and here's the live tag.
Sorry guys, not this time. And guys, take a look at Marcus right there in the hat. He's coming back to Texas, a Green Bay Packers fan. Dad says that's okay by him. He only cares that Marcus is safe tonight. The family hopes to make the trip home tomorrow.
So there's bringing the story right up to the finish line, right? I mean, we could have just ended the piece and she could have gone, oh, what a story or something like that. But instead, taking that piece of the story that was one of the things probably a number of people were noticing and then lighten it up at the end. I thought it was a beautiful way to wrap up that.
Oh, it's a great touch. And I love that she's examining something at the very end. It's not just some mindless tag that we have some mindless video that goes over top of or no video at all. Well, let me make this point real quick, John, because I know a lot of the times, and it's been a while since I was a news director, about 13 years ago, I was still looking through copy and wanting to proofread some of the reporter stories. I wouldn't look at one that didn't have the anchor intro and the anchor tag if it only had the reporter copy. Because quite frankly, to what John talked about earlier, the story for the viewer begins with what the anchors say and it ends with what the anchors say. And what's your best advice then if you've got people who have bad tags?
Well, I think you argue you have to have either new information, an anecdote, like in these cases, there's a nice anecdote, or you need to frame it for the viewers and say, here's the 2 things you'll hear about tomorrow related to this story.
Yeah.
So they don't feel like they're lost in space on some long tag where we took everything we couldn't put in the story and threw it in the tag.
Well, or reporters, I would tell you this, those that are listening, I know there's a lot of you that are, people should be taking something of value out of your story and putting it on the tag if we're going to have a tag. And you don't want to be in that situation. I'd rather use a reporter write it that way the first time because you're crafting the whole thing. But the tag is super important, and John pointed it out. Every time we do dial testing on bad tags, those meters, they die. They tank. They go away. So moving on, John, I'll let you get along to this.
Well, I mean, this is kind of a challenge I took on myself, and we'll see you guys. I'd love to get some notes from you guys and see if this makes sense or what should I extract or add to. I was just trying to talk to ourselves about what kind of stories we really are asked to tell and which ones are going to make for good storytelling. So kind of as you watch what comes up on the screen, it'd be interesting to know, pick 3, pick 2 of these categories you think we can tell stories in that category, and 3 maybe that are more difficult. And I'll begin explaining because I put them in these different camps. So we know we live in this world, right? We need to, we want to, and we're going to do stories that are breaking. We're going to deal with tragedy or near tragedy. Here's how it happened, right? Or here's how it didn't happen. And then we're going to deal with fear in the urgency camp and how people are worried about things. And that's what we do, is we try to get to the heart of their safety and security concerns on many fronts. So depth is a part of what we do, right? The digging piece, huge transitions in that over the past years. I think sometimes we used to think of that as more like an investigative unit down the hall, but now it's got to happen because headlines become stale so quickly. The process storytelling, and we'll look at an example here in a second, how did we put the story together? And then discovery, here's what this looks like. Here's a closer look, taking a microscope to a part of a story. And I'm going to play a portion of this story from West Palm Beach, which is one of my favorites, because these 2 poor missing boys are out there and they covered the headline of the story, but somebody in the newsroom decided to ask kind of a question we all wonder is, how come with all these helicopters out there, they can't rescue people, these guys or any guys, it's people that seem to be at sea. So here's how they handled it.
We head out the Jupiter Inlet and into the Atlantic.
Things go wrong out in the water quickly.
We're with retired Coast Guard helicopter rescue swimmer Steve Hathaway. He's been on countless searches like the one for Austin and Perry.
I am very hopeful, yeah. I'm hopeful. Absolutely. You got to be.
Steve and I go into the ocean. Watch closely. As Chopper 5 zooms out, you realize how small we really are. Quickly, we become almost invisible. Even my orange life jacket disappears into the blue Atlantic. This is what pilots are up against.
If you panic, you're done. You got to stay cool.
Steve says 90% of staying alive is mental, staying calm and making yourself noticeable.
There's something coming, I'm going to splash like this. I'm going to make myself a big target. I do this. Okay.
Even with 80-degree water, hypothermia is the biggest threat.
Huddle position is when you pull your knees up, keep your arms like this.
Staying warm is the difference between life and death. Steve says after 2 days, the salt water in your mouth makes it so you can barely talk.
It's hard to yell.
So, wow, one of the best stories I've really seen. You wonder how many things in our news coverage would be possible to kind of take a microscope to something to create that level of understanding. It's hard to get that story off your mind and it sure tells you why people are not easily found.
Yeah, you know, John, one of the things too that reminds me in the storytelling is I had a boss once that he was a general manager, and he had been a news director, and that was my first mistake, working for a general manager. No, I'm just kidding. But he said, right? They know too much. He said, you know what I love? I love when people stop me on the street and say, I love what your team, news team, did with that story yesterday. Not, I love what your news team, just, you know, how they gave me the facts or how they laid it out in order. But this is doing something with a story that's already out there, that's the headline, and now they're turning it in a different angle, and they're doing that discovery piece. And he's dead on. Even to this day, it's not like who's going to be the best necessarily to lay out the facts. It's what are you going to do with it in many cases. So it's an excellent example, no doubt.
The process storytelling is interesting. I clipped this from WOIO in Cleveland, and they do a nice job with this. This was recently an incredible story there of them, the mayor's grandson potentially in trouble for something. You know, shouldn't the police be investigating it differently? And then where is the police chief? And so this is a part of the story where they're trying to track down the police chief.
But for that conflict.
And that's where the story ended yesterday. Today, I went to Cleveland Police Headquarters looking for Chief Calvin Williams to ask him if he is willing to turn the murder case over to another agency, and if not, why.
They're not expecting you up there, and you have to make an appointment.
Okay, is there a way that we can make an appointment?
I don't know. You can feel free to call a number.
I got the runaround in person and on the phone.
Hi, this is Brittany with Channel 19. I wanted to see about making an appointment to talk to the police chief. Do you know who I can talk to about that? I was calling to see if there's any way to speak to the chief today.
They told me he would not be in the office all day. We could not get past these elevators without a key card, so we waited.
It's now about 1 o'clock, and we've been waiting in this hallway for about an hour now, but there's been no sign of the police chief.
And kept waiting. It's about 2 o'clock outside the police station, and we do not see the chief's car here anywhere. We also haven't seen him outside. His office told me he'd be out all day. The end of.
So that's pretty interesting. I just showed that to a couple of folks that I thought would find they may not like it, but they actually said they wanted to emulate it. That it was just brought to life, this tracking down this police chief who was really in hiding at the time.
No, absolutely. I thought it was really well done.
We know we have a lot of issue stories we'll fall into, you know, two sides wanting different outcomes, right? It happens every day. We want change, something new in the works. Somebody wants to put in a new highway, a toll system. They want to move the bus station downtown. Challenges, something needs fixing. You know, our schools' infrastructures are falling apart, et cetera. So we've got stories in that camp. I realize there's some crossover in some of these stories. They're not distinctly 15 different categories. The emotion, the humanity, people caught up in the emotional situations. Again, how much of that can we find and accentuate in our storytelling? We end up covering a lot of events, and we end up I'll call it seasons, just because everybody, when I'm in a story session, said, you know, yeah, what am I going to do this time when it's the first snowfall or it's the first nice day in spring? I won't show examples here, but I do try to push teams to reinvent those moments that we feel like are Groundhog's Day. Now, I think emerging from is there new storytelling is the technique aspect. And I'll show a story here that's pretty interesting from New York in a second. Numbers that offer context versus traditional storytelling. Framing a story using a device, something within a story that brings the story to life. I've got an example there. And then freestyle, which is, I think we used to call, what did we call those? Where there's little or no track, and there's people in the story, and bringing that back is almost a bit of a Back to the Future, but we're seeing
the old Nats package, right? The old Nats package. Before we move on to the examples, and I really want to show all that we have, because I think you got some good ones. But this is the last time we'll see these 15 on the screen. And we're not going to get into like your story pitch meetings and those kind of stuff. But I do think we should make a point here that I think it's important to identify what your story is and what it isn't in terms of some of these things that John has up on the screen, so that we then start to get a feel for, okay, if reporter A is doing one that feels urgent and reporter heavy on the urgent tragic, but the reporter B is doing one on emotion, that may fit. But talk a little bit about how you think it's important, John, to just identify what your story is and isn't as it relates to maybe these 15.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all looking for ways to communicate with each other, right, from the time of the morning meeting or notes that go out in the morning or the night before. Like, what is this going to be? If you look at the Boyd Huppert story as an example,
right?
Somebody had to talk them into doing it because well, maybe not him, but other reporters have to talk a newsroom into doing it that way because a lot of people want to put in everything. So is this a story about the economy and humanity? That's really what that became, right?
Right.
That was not a digging deeper. That was not a conflict of what should we do with the interest rate. It was not a fact-driven story. So sometimes knowing what a story is and what it's not creates a lot more focus to the story. And maybe,
I agree 100%.
Maybe this list of 15 will help us communicate better within newsrooms.
Perfect.
Is storytelling different than it used to be? That category off to the right on the previous chart. Bike riders in New York, it's been dangerous lately. This is a different way they wanted to put the story together. Originally, the idea was to use it only on digital, but they liked it enough to put it on broadcast.
We need to talk about sharing, and particularly sharing these roads, because what's happening to cyclists in New York City is pretty concerning. Just take it from police.
When a bicyclist killed, we really have to make sure we show some sensitivity here.
18 cyclists have died just trying to get around town. At that rate, we could hit over 30 cyclists by the end of the year, more than 3 times the number of cyclists who died last year.
That's unacceptable.
So what's going on? Well, a couple of things. First of all, the number of cyclists on our roads is increasing. In the second quarter this year, daily trips on City Bike were up about 12% compared to last year. Then there's the issue of these guys, bike lanes. New York City has more than 1,200 miles of bike lanes. 480 of those miles have special barriers to protect bikers. But that only covers about 20% of our streets. And those protected lanes, even less, just about 8%. Meaning everywhere else is a bit of biking roulette. And even in places with bike lanes, using them isn't always easy because cars are using the lanes for parking. The police department has issued more than 33,000 summons to vehicles blocking bike lanes. And now they're promising to step it up.
All traffic enforcement agents throughout the city have been told to focus summonses on the bike lanes.
Of course, it's not just the drivers. Cyclists haven't always followed the rules of the road either. And if you're going to ride a bike, you've got to take safety seriously. But the NYPD says cyclists aren't their biggest problem. Police say just about 3% of the moving violations handed out by officers last year went to cyclists.
There's a huge difference between a 3,000-pound vehicle and a 20-pound bicycle.
So bottom line, whether you rely on 4 wheels or 2 or just use your feet, New York City, you've got to get better about sharing the road.
So stylistically, it's very different, which makes it interesting. It also knows what it's not going to be. It's not an emotional story. We don't even meet any cyclists, which you might say is a bad thing, but at least the story knew what it wanted to be. You know, I've shown this around. Some people say, well, if you put that in the newscast, then everything else in the newscast looks kind of old and stale. You're like, well, maybe that's a good problem.
Yeah, no kidding.
The other argument was that it was just too overloaded on facts, and I would argue that that's probably true. There was a lot to digest there. But the does it belong on digital, does it belong on TV thing, the lines are really getting blurred because we've tested a lot of things that we thought were digital only that the viewers were ready to watch on a linear broadcast as well. Quickly out of Houston, this is an interesting thing. This is a story, and a quasi-investigative story about money being spent on trying to recruit tourists from China. And it's interesting the device the reporter used to kind of bring the story to life. I'll just let part of it play.
A dream to sell Houston to Asian tourists came true at last month's New York Fashion Week.
The city's Convention and Visitors Bureau spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to partner with a Houston fashion designer for a Houston-inspired clothing line.
Now, our Ted Oberg is not a fashionista. He's our investigative reporter, and he has questions about whether it was money well spent.
When it comes to high fashion, I admit I'm no expert, but this isn't about fashion, it's about money. Some of your Houston Convention and Visitors Bureau money used to design dresses with butterflies and NASA rice and the rodeo logos to convince Asian tourists to vacation in Houston.
Duh. very plain.
So we asked Houstonians, would it work?
That definitely is eye-catching for Houston. It is not going to bring tourists.
The collection is from Vivian Tam, a big-time fashion designer, huge in Asia, we're told, where Houston wanted to create buzz and improve its reputation as a tourist draw. Organizers say it's generated 700 million online impressions so far, and the fashion press seem to like it.
But why Houston, Texas to base a fashion collection on? Houston is in my blood now. I love the city.
Vivian Tam may have Houston in her blood and dreams of our beautiful city at night, but the Greater Houston Convention and Visitors Bureau spent $400,000 to make Miss Tam's dream a fashion runway reality.
$450,000.
Almost.
So, again, they're using a device to tell a story. I think is pretty interesting because that story was very good factually, right, from the get-go. Yeah. But bringing that easel out there, and there's a reason, I think a copyright reason why they couldn't show it on TV, all the images. But I don't know. I just thought that really made a big difference to be that creative with the storytelling.
No, absolutely. I thought it was really well done.
I know we're limited for time. We're coming close to the end here. We'll just maybe see a bit of this. Some of you who really get into storytelling more from a natural sound and soundbite only should check out Localish. It's the ABC-owned station's effort in all their markets to do digital storytelling with just the narrative of the people in the story. Just show a quick snapshot of this, Bill. It's interesting.
I am Richard Cornish. We're here at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where we're able to give these kids and their family members haircuts free of charge and bring a little joy to them.
It's like a soccer player, I'd say.
Only better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You look so handsome.
Thank you.
The nurses will not leave you alone now, I'm sure. I love it. There's a whole lot of goodness going on over here, Tony.
My name is Karen Salerno, and I'm here at CHOP with my...
You know, the stations I work with, ABC, they're using these on air as well. Not exactly the exact same version, but to your point, John, I think there is a lot that it has worked in the digital and social space that's now more appropriate to use on TV, whereas in the past, there were harder lines on some of that, right?
Well, and what's amazing when you look at a couple of these or go online and look at them is how much you remember the people and how much, and sometimes in a linear story on a day of, we don't introduce people in a way that sticks to you, you know? Or sometimes we almost use them like glorified MOSs instead of giving you just a sentence and a half of context that brings that person to life.
Character development, right? It's back to what you're talking about, literature. It's character development. Absolutely. You want to see a little bit of this one, or should we just?
Yeah. Just we can wrap up with this one because we'll get the point. The point with this one, this is a big market, Chicago, right? So we started doing storytelling sessions there with people who have 25, 30 years experience. And, you know, at first they're like, we'll just do it the way we've been doing it. But we started showing the Nat Sound pieces. And I said, I'm going to challenge you guys to use this in a harder news story. So this Waukegan explosion happens, right? Big deal, a couple months ago. And they're having the memorial for it. And so the reporter said, I just did a stand-up open and then turned it over to the people at the memorial. So let's just get a quick glimpse of this. This is also on
Waukegan, in front of the rubble where so much has been flattened. 4 crosses are standing tall for the 4 men who were killed. 4 hearts, pictures, and flowers below as a community comes together to remember who they lost.
Byron Bean, second shift supervisor, owner.
You must know that through your tears flows the memories that you've had with these loved ones.
Jeff Cummings, third shift supervisor.
We pray that you would surround them with strength and hope and healing.
Alan Stevens, second shift operator, owner.
And when this happens, our feet come straight to the ground. It's a reality check, and it leaves us numb. And only time and healing can get us through this.
Daniel Nicholas, second shift, QC chemist.
We're like a family. We're all family here, you know. It's just hard to lose them.
They were wonderful guys. Simple, hard workers, faithful. Yeah.
We're loved. I'm just thankful for all the love and support that we have from the community. God bless this AV family. God God bless this community. We love it.
In Waukegan, Mark Rivera, ABC 7.
So day of turn, a newsroom that's probably more used to doing, just fast moving stories like a lot of us like to do, but they decided they'd tell this a little differently, and they were pretty proud of it.
Yeah, they should have been. I think that we definitely should stop and ask ourselves, do we have moments, do stories demand moments?
Eyewitness News
as well, right? So thank you, John. That was amazing. One thing that I left out, I'm going to ask for questions here. You guys go into the Q&A or the chat room there, and we'll answer whatever questions you have. We got about 9 minutes to do so. I also just launched the poll that you guys can take. I asked 3 questions there. I promise it's going to be all anonymous. Even I won't know who answered what, but it'll give us, maybe we can take a look at some of the answers here as we're doing this in real time to see where you guys sit in your newsrooms about finding real people, being consistent about using real people. One of the things I asked in the poll, John, that I think it was on my end, not blaming you, but we didn't talk as much about is what's the difference between storytelling and reporting? We talked about that at the very beginning. I'll let you kind of answer that really quickly without the visual support that I think I must have hid the slide somewhere. But there's a distinct difference between storytelling, quote unquote, and reporting.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to talk about this. I'll just raise one point. I think a lot of times early in a story's life, we only are getting facts and disseminating those facts. And then gradually we begin to tell a story with it. So the battle's on the minute we have a breaking story is to turn it into a story and not just a breaking news factual event.
Right. What's the narrative, right? What's the we're not trying to put our spin on the story. We're not trying to slant the story, but we also definitely want to know what goes beyond what these quote unquote set of facts that came on this press release or what we were told at a press conference and all those kinds of things.
Well, we battle that in the morning, particularly with overnight crime, right? All
Absolutely.
Of the morning reporters have that challenge of not just reading the police report, but learning the people behind the story.
Yeah. So this is where you can ask some questions if you want to ask some questions in the chat. I don't see any just yet. So if you don't have any questions, that's okay too. Let's see how we're doing on our poll really quickly. It's only been open for a couple of minutes. My first question, John, I don't know if you can see this or not. Can you see this, John?
I can't, but you can tell me.
Okay, I'll tell you. It says, where would you rank your newsroom on consistently finding real people for your storytelling? Are they horrible? Are they almost horrible, average, above average, or amazing? We always have real people. As you can imagine, average falls in right now, leading the pack with about 55% of you saying, yeah, we're pretty average in that. 25% say, no, we're above average. Most of the time we have it. But some of you say, gosh, we're almost horrible. We're at 21% in terms of finding real people. And I don't know about you, John, but I think that goes across all market sizes that I work in as well, in terms of finding that real person that really is going to help us to tell the story.
Yeah, I don't think it's a market size thing. I think it's just an awareness thing. And sometimes you've got to, I mean, at WAVE in Louisville, Dan and I have done something where we looked at sound bites just from the whole newscast. Like I just went through a newscast and pulled only sound and just looked at the ratio of officials to real people. It's an interesting exercise. Who do we get to meet in your newscast?
Cool. Well, we did have a question here on the Q&A. Alex LaRue, where can I find the poll? I just launched it, so it should have showed up for you there. If you don't see it, I apologize. I don't know how to launch it again. My second question was, are reporters at your station confused about the difference between storytelling and reporting, quote unquote, just giving facts? 73%, John, of the respondents so far say yes, they are confused about that. That doesn't surprise me, quite frankly. Now, I put this off on reporters, kind of intentionally, because I knew we'd have some in the room. Your job as reporters is not to go out and get a whole bunch of facts and shove those facts at me in a big old basket and let me get 5 more facts and shove them in there and get me some more officials to shove some more facts in there. Your job is to, yes, get those facts, but figure out how we tell a story with that. And maybe the answer sometimes, John, is maybe there's not a story there or we don't have the components to do that. Did you talk really quickly about that?
Well, I think there's 2 parts of this. One is, finding that hook of what, the tension that someone got through a difficult situation. But more than that, it might be this whole idea of how much to include. I think early in my reporting days, like 100 years ago, they said it's more important what you put in than what you leave out. I almost took offense to that at the time because I thought, well, you mean you don't want to leave out the most important stuff, right? But good editors are taking things out all the time to make it so someone can actually digest the story.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Matt Griffin has a question of how would you suggest motivating reporters to practice storytelling? What's the best way to celebrate? So my question number 3, John, was which of the following ways do you celebrate great storytelling in your shop? And I said you can answer multiple times in here. I listed a few examples of things that I've done in the past or I've seen done in the past. The first one was we show the story or part of it in daily meetings, just kind of like John showed snippets here. News managers send a link in an email or social to everybody to show what great storytelling we did. We played the stories on monitors throughout the building. Now that's a hard one. Your GM probably has to help you with that. But I saw that done with great success in a couple of different stations where the news director would say, get that storytelling. I want it playing on that monitor as we loop things around. We have a contest for best storytelling for the week with a prize. We do something else to celebrate storytelling, or we don't do anything to celebrate storytelling. Unfortunately, right now, John, we don't do anything to celebrate storytelling is winning at 53% of the poll, people that took the poll.
Well, I think that there's a lot of great ideas in there, and we should brainstorm more of them. But one of them is certainly showing it the next day at the morning meeting. I mean, I think reporters are still competitive, although some people tell me next generation is not like we used to be, so cutthroat. But I don't want to be the guy in the room whose story never gets shown, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. Well, guys, we got about 2 minutes left. If there's any other questions, be happy to take those. Otherwise, I'll just remind you that, I don't think I have to remind you, I haven't told you yet. This presentation that John and I have showed you, mainly John, is something that is actually, we haven't showed the whole thing. So if you work with us, if you have a Smith Geiger consultant that comes to your TV station, we'd love to be able to kind of pick up on what we started with the conversation here and then push that back into what you're actually doing or quote unquote not doing, as especially as it relates to those 15 stories. So there is more to this presentation. So if you work with us, make sure you ask about it, and we'll make sure to continue that conversation. We are going to be sending out a link of the recording of this webinar, hopefully as early as this afternoon. I've got to get it down and post it to YouTube and send it back out. I will send it. It won't be to everybody that's a panelist here. I just send it out to the general managers, the news directors, and the group vice presidents. That's the email that I sent. So if you didn't get something from me, ask your news director about getting a link back to this as well. And by the way, I should have said this up front. It's okay if reporters are here or news directors here and you disagree, or you have you're like, I don't know if I believe that. Great. We just wanted to start the conversation with you in many ways about what reporting is and tell you what we're seeing, how research is affecting our shape of it all. But absolutely, we have to be able to have an open dialogue about what works and doesn't work for you in your specific market as well. So, John, I'll let you have the final word here. We got about 30 seconds.
We'd be happy to do this again. There's so many other dimensions to storytelling. Let us know if there's areas you think we didn't do as well in or needed to cover more richly. We'll do it.
All right. Well, John, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being part of this one.
Good to talk to everyone.
And we don't do these monthly, guys. We do these about 6 times a year for Gray. If you have suggestions or ideas that you want to do different things, let us know. Let your news director know. They can pass that along to us in terms of our next webinar. But for now, I'm going to end this one and say thank you for your participation. You guys are amazing. Talk to you soon.
See ya.